All right, you guys. So this is the overview video to get you going on Egyptian art. So one thing I said I was going to do this in class and I forgot to. So I'm going to show you guys the study guides. It's better to do this on it anyway. So this is student view for the art history page. I just wanted to show you guys that I had put this on here and I forgot to explain it. Study guides, we're going to go through it in a second because it'll be a good review for ancient Near East and then preview for Egypt. Okay, so I will try and remember to put it in modules, but what I also wanted to show you is if you go down here right above my head, see where it says files? You should have access. I need to delete that one, but you should have access to these files. So there's a folder for ancient Mediterranean, which is just a content area, how AP divides it up. So within ancient Mediterranean, there's one for ancient Near East, Egypt, Greek, etc. When you click on ancient Near East, there are digital files of all of the graphic organizers. So if there's ever a time that you don't have your packet with you and you want to work on it, there are digital files available to you in Canvas if you want to. If your dog eats one, you know, things happen. So there's backups here. And there should be one of these, an ancient Near East study guide. There's a study guide in all of the files. Okay. There's also a vocab sheet that's purely just for your own information. If you want to know, just see some of the words that we use for this. I feel like I'm really dark. Here it goes. Right. So if you want to see some of the words that we're going to be using for this chapter. Okay. All right. Not that you need to see my face so much, but you know. All right, so just so you guys know that those are there in files. I will try to put them in modules for you too. If I forget, it's under files. If you want to look ahead, if you want to print them out, you can go in here. If you click on one of these, you should, up here you have options to download and all that. Okay. Oh yeah, these have the pictures on them. I took them off for two reasons. One for printing and one because drawing is going to reinforce it in a different way. But I am working on a space where the 250 images will be all in one place. Obviously you can get those on Khan Academy, Smart History, AP Central right now. But I am going to create a module with a folder of just the 250 piece images for you. So that's coming, okay? All right, we're going to get out of here. So this is the Ancient Near East Study Guide. So what it has is the name, obviously. Sabanp is not a really weird word. All that means is those are the different cultures: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Neo-Sumerian, and Persian. Just showing which one was in control at the time. Key concepts: symbolism, power, and storytelling. So we talked a lot about power and authority. Symbolism, like the votive statues are kind of a symbol, a surrogate, stand-in. The sun is symbolizing divinity, and storytelling, because we started seeing that with the narrative in the Standard of Ur. Okay. What this is, the curriculum framework essentials, is in the AP curriculum for the exam. I went through and I pulled out a couple of their terminology, their main points. So this is just giving you a little bit of what the AP curriculum expects you to know. The artistic traditions of it focused on representing royal figures and gods and the function of funerary and palatial complexes. Okay, we didn't talk so much on the funerary. That's going to come into play with Egypt a little bit more. Religion plays a significant role. Divine attributes, hierarchical scale, monumental architecture, fortification to show power and authority. So your main concepts from Ancient Near East. This context is a little bit of the background for you. Sometimes it'll tell you what's going on in the history of the time. Sometimes it'll be politics. Sometimes it might make connections to contemporary things that are going on. Geographical, I don't know why it says geology. I think it means geography. Patronage, artistic life, etc. Okay, it just reminds you which ones are connected for this unit. So it reminds you, for ID quizzes and snapshots or graphic organizers, Sometimes they're called snapshots, sometimes they're called graphic organizers. I might just call them note sheets sometimes. Just understand those are your worksheets, okay? This is just how throughout the course I show you other pieces for context. So if some of you were curious about them, then this is just for your own knowledge, just so you know. So like the Victory Steely of Non-Sim was the one with the guy on the mountain with the two suns on top of him. Okay. Vocabulary, same as what we said before. Some of these we will use more than others. So things that I've already talked about, I've used votive offering, narrative, relief, ziggurat, access and orientation was in your notes for your worksheet for ziggurat. Profile versus frontal, we kind of started getting to that, register, hierarchical scale, etc. So don't feel like you have to quiz yourself on the vocab or do definitions. Ignore that part. This is just some of the language I'm going to be trying to use in the lectures to get you used to it. If I start using the words, you guys will start understanding them versus write out definitions. We're just going to use it in context. Okay, the next part is study guide questions, ideas, and concepts. So it says this is not homework, but if you're still trying to figure out how do I approach art history, what am I supposed to be looking for, okay? So what was the Sumerian view of the afterlife? We said it was pretty gloomy and miserable, and so how is that reflected in the artworks? The idea of sacred space, and it says see below, we're going to get to that. Is a ziggurat an example of sacred space? And then your own personal reaction. One thing I am going to mention, there's it's pretty current right now, like it's a very popular trend, where you look at something and you say, first off, what do I notice? So we kind of did that with the Sumerian votive offerings, the surrogate figures. We said, what do you notice? The big eyes, the small hands clasped, so you notice things first, and then what do you wonder about? I wonder why do they have big eyes? It makes you wonder. And then we find out the answers. So noticing and wondering are part of the process. So these kind of idea questions just to maybe help you through that process. That's all those are for. Okay, where it says homework, you guys can kind of ignore part of this. These are study guides from, I think, 2016 that I just have not updated. Everything else is current. You guys can ignore this. If you were in class, we might be using the books in class a little bit. Gardeners. Sometimes I'll put some supplemental reading, on a module. But for now, like the snapshots, that's your homework. Okay? Don't worry about defining the vocab. And then number 4, reviewing nightly for weekly quizzes on ID. Reviewing art history, if you have 5 minutes, even if you just start kind of quizzing yourself and getting real familiar with the names, really good idea. All right, and so then sometimes at the end of the study guide sheet, I have some extra things, characteristics or something. So this is the concept of sacred space, which is pretty prevalent in AP Art History. So what defines a sacred space? And this is criteria sometimes used. So exclusivity, like it's exclusive. It doesn't have access to everything. Everybody doesn't have access. Material wealth or decoration. So if you think of a ziggurat, it's exclusive in the way it was set apart, and the temple at the top was set apart and exclusive. Not everybody had access. Material wealth and decoration, even if it looks all crumbly now, the fact of how big and huge and massive it was shows wealth was needed to create it. Was it tied to ritual and ceremony, and then historical or religious, events? So some of these criteria we could apply definitely to the ziggurat, but this is just some extra information for you. Okay. All right. So now that we've been doing that already. Let's go over Egypt. These 2 words are going to be huge for ancient Egypt. Permanence and timelessness. Egypt stays consistent in a lot of areas. Sometimes they switch from pyramids to mortuary temples and there's a slight shift, but their art looks almost the same for 3,000 years because they wanted to show how mighty they were. Nothing changed. They were that consistent. They were permanent. Egypt was not to be messed with, and it was going to stay forever. Basically, it's kind of what they're saying. So they're timeless and they're permanent. So if you think about the building materials, they're using materials that are going to stay and be really solid. Their sculptures, they're going to do low relief, which we said doesn't project out a lot, so it's going to take the wearing of time and sand and sun. Think about the brutality of the desert conditions that they're in a lot of the times. Okay? And the art is around the ideas of eternity, the afterlife, and the rebirth. Okay? So you really can't talk about Egyptian art or architecture without tying it into their religion, for sure. Okay? All right. You will read through these a little bit more. It's a lot about the pharaoh. Everything's about the pharaoh. And like I said, it's looking in terms of eternity. So the concept of the Ka statues, furnishing the tomb for the pharaoh, which is the point of the pyramids, which we'll get to. Okay? So everything's showing the pharaoh as a god king, absolute power, and coming from the sun, descended from the sun. We talked about how important the sun god was. Okay? All right. Lower class, hierarchical scale. We'll talk more about idealized and naturalized, which we hit on in ancient Near East. So you can kind of go through the context, just understand that these are our pieces that we're going to be going through. Not all today. This is just a preview. All right, there's a few extras that we might go over, we might not, just in case. Vocabulary that might get used in class. Ideas and concepts. Why they did what they did. Okay? And that's it for the study guide sheet. All right, so as we move forwards, we're going to finish up Ancient Near East because there's an overview video that applies to Ancient Near East, and also it goes back to Ancient Egypt. I have to remind you guys sometimes. Some of the videos are like more serious. This one's more fun. It's just a cool, quick little overview, giving you the synopsis and kind of the key points of all that. All this stuff. All right.
Here, but you can call me Art. This is Explorations in Art History, starring me. And the hand. Well, what about the rest of me? How embarrassing. People watching from around the world and I'm stuck waiting on some five-fingered prima donna. Oh, well, that's better. It looks like we'll be talking about the Mesopotamian and Egyptian period. We're going back 5,000 years to a place the Greeks called Mesopotamia, which means land between the rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates, which formed a fertile crescent, sometimes called the cradle of civilization. Oh, very funny. Mesopotamia actually refers to an area rather than a country. At different times it was ruled by the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians. They lived close to the natural world, and like this lion that decorated the walls of the Ishtar Gate, their animal art was pretty realistic. Their human art, not so realistic. Both Mesopotamian and Egyptian artists stylized the human body. In Mesopotamia, they invented the first written language called cuneiform. They started with pictographs, but over time the writing evolved into more abstract symbols. They also got to invent cool names for their buildings like ziggurat. In they built a massive ziggurat to pay homage to the gods. Ziggurat. I love the sound of that. The ziggurat was the center of the city. Moving on. Mesopotamia may have started the civilization craze, but Egypt took it to a new standard. Egypt depended on one great river, the Nile, and developed a civilization that lasted over 3,000 years. When Tutankhamun became pharaoh, the Great Pyramids were already 1,000 years old, and it was another 1,000 years after that when Cleopatra held power. Egyptologists invented an ingenious system to classify the different periods of Egyptian rule. There's the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and the Later Kingdom. How did they think of that? Interestingly, artistic styles never changed much over 3,000 years. The best artist was probably the one who could most closely copy the classic style of the past. What was good enough for Khufu was good enough for Ramses. Except for one brief moment called the Amarna period, when a pharaoh named Akhenaten ushered in a new style and a new religion. All of a sudden, faces got stretched, bodies got streamlined and lengthened, thin was in. But when Akhenaten passed away, Egypt quickly reverted back to the old familiar ways. That doesn't mean Egyptians weren't creative. Just look at their pantheon of gods. They imagined jackal-headed gods and hawk-headed gods, lion-headed goddesses, rawr, hippo-headed goddesses, oh my, crocodile-headed gods, and ibis-headed gods, cat-headed gods, and, well, you get the picture. Of course, the pharaohs themselves were considered the living gods. Pharaohs were portrayed according to specific rules that emphasized their perfect, unchanging nature. Usually these representations included some symbols of authority like the royal headdress, the crook, and the flail, and a false beard. Even the female pharaoh, Hatshepsut, commissioned statues of herself with the false beard to reinforce her position of authority. Oh, attractive. Egyptians obsessed over death and the afterlife. Paintings on the walls of tombs often showed the Ba, or soul, on its journey through the afterlife. When an Egyptian artist painted a figure, every body part was shown from its most recognizable angle. The face was shown in profile, except for the eye, which was shown head-on. The body was shown head-on, and the legs and feet were twisted back into profile. Don't try this at home. Alexander the Great admired the Egyptian kingdom so much that he decided to conquer it in 332 BC. While in...
Alright, we're going to stop with that, and we're going to move on. Okay, so, real quickly, just a basic introduction into Egypt. Okay? Alright, so, they talked about it in that overview. I mean, you know, like, as kind of silly as those videos are, they're actually really good at just showing you the basic concepts, because, you know, they talk about timelessness and permanence kind of concept, the importance of the afterlife, the importance of gods and the sun, the Nile, they were dependent on, and, you know, just all of that. So you can kind of see that. So some questions just to think about. You don't have to write this down. But how does the geography shape a culture's worldview, concerns, and values? How is that reflected in their art and architecture? So especially in Egypt, between building materials, like harsh conditions, and then the importance of the Nile and like the flooding of it and just the cyclical nature of that. How does that shape and come into importance? How do works of art and architecture reflect historical, religious, and cultural context? So a lot of you guys were asking about those three boxes in the middle. These are all kind of things to think of as you're trying to fill in those context boxes. And like I said, those are sometimes kind of fluid. Those three ones in the middle, don't worry if it's in box 4 or box 6, but just make sure you're thinking through these types of questions. How does it reflect what was going on? Okay? And then how can we understand a structure by interpreting its floor plan? Kind of like what we looked at with the citadel, where we could see the whole city. It's kind of looking at the plan. All right, this is just really old copy of a wall painting from a tomb, just to kind of show you some way beginnings. All right, so we talked briefly, real quick at the end of class, about what we know about ancient Egypt, and we'll kind of be adding to that. Main concepts, overview, timeless and permanent. They wanted it to stay the same, like they said on that video, from, you know, along the years. They just want to show that consistency because it shows power. Okay, so what we're going to do really quickly is look at the palette of Narmer. Okay, don't write this down. Just showing you what the plan is. So this is the palette of Narmer. This is on your 250 list. I don't have it in front of me, sorry. I believe it's number 13. I had to take a guess. So this is the palette of King Narmer. Okay, this is what you want to look at in terms of your identifiers. Pre-dynastic Egypt, around 3000. So very similar time period to what we were talking about with ancient Near East. They're contemporaries of each other. and it's slate, and it's about 2 feet tall. Okay, these are typical characteristics of Egyptian art. So in general, like Egyptian art is very easy to identify and see because they have like rules. And like I said in the video, the person who can follow the rules the best and make it look the most Egyptian they're the most successful artists. So the composite view or twisted perspective that we've kind of started talking about, in general, like I said, it's going to be profile of the head, profile of legs and arms, but you're going to see front of the eye and the torso. Okay. The more formal the stance, the more important of a figure, the more they're going to go with those rules. Okay, it's kind of ironic. The people that sometimes look the most realistic or naturalistic are the commoners, slaves, and defeated enemies, which we kind of started seeing. So the more important a person, the more they're going to conform to that set of rules. It's also called a canon. We're going to talk about that later on Thursday. Okay, we're going to start seeing registers again to separate the story, the narrative, and symbols, all sorts of things. So these are all in this paladin armor. You get to see a lot of this just overview of the characteristics. The last thing, pharaohs were idealized. Okay, in the video, it used the word stylized. When you stylize something, you're making it look a specific style. So the votive offerings of Sumerian, those statues were stylized. They were not meant to look like realistic. They were to a certain style. Okay, pharaohs, they might look more realistic, but they are idealized. All these istic and words coming at you. They're meant to look at an ideal. They're showing the perfect. So when you see a statue of a pharaoh from 3,000 years ago, did that pharaoh look like that? Probably not, but they're pictured as young, strong, like the perfect looking human being. Okay. So paladin armor. One thing that is unique to the paladin armor, it's a transitional piece. So it's linking prehistory to historical, where we started tracking history basically. So it's showing the formula for how they would do figure representation. That's characteristic after that. Just so you know, palette, think about like an artistic palette where we mix colors and things. Back in Egypt, it was a palette was used to prepare eye makeup. This one is kind of like a fancy version, so it would be more of a palette for more of like ceremony. They weren't using the paladin armor just like every day. So if you think about like the eye makeup thing with Egypt, you know how you see with the really dark line on the eye, they would apply makeup a lot of times to reflect. It's kind of like eye black from football and baseball players to keep the glare of the sun manageable. All right. Scenes in relief, low relief, and it's going to show the unification of Egypt. And another very unique thing about this, most of the time, Egyptian artwork is for funerary purposes. It's for the afterlife. This one is actually commemorating an event, which makes it very unique for Egyptian art. You do not need to write this down, but I'm just showing you. Feel free to write it down if you want to. But a lot of times people are just curious, like, what is going on? So we have the king, who we know who he is, because he's huge. Remember, hierarchical scale. Okay, he's about to kill. It's shown like more as a ritual killing, not as like a field of battle. Okay, the way you can tell is that the sandals are off. He's barefoot. Okay, think Bible stories. Think holy ground. It's consecrated, so you remove your sandals. Okay. In the lower register, here are the defeated people. So they are not in this. This is the formal, twisted perspective composite view. And here they are more like loose. So if you see people kind of, you know, like that, bendy, then they're lower on the hierarchical scale. Okay. So this guy is in this stance. So he might be a person in the royal complex. Maybe it's, you know, whether it's a son, or whether it's, you know, a relative or a person of high-ranking official, that sort of thing. Okay. There's all kinds of stuff in here, but you don't have to know all the symbols for me or for the AP exam, for the AP test, either way. Okay? All right, you have Lower Egypt is symbolized by the papyrus scroll, and Falcon of Horus is the symbol of the pharaoh. Okay? This is just more out of curiosity kind of thing. So this is the other side of the palette. So you can see where they would mix the eye makeup actually, like in this little circle. Okay, and they're not 100% sure on some of these things, but right here, this part's pretty cool. These are the bodies of the defeated armies, and they're beheaded, and their heads are between their legs. Awesome. So it's just showing, remember, we're not worrying about perspective because obviously they can be stacked up, up. These are just laying down. But remember, they want to show as much information to be clear. So this isn't supposed to be meant as, hey, how come this perspective doesn't match up? This is organized and put into like these registers and divided. They want to give you the story as clearly as possible. Okay? It's not that they couldn't do perspective. They didn't need perspective. All right, you got the bulls at the top. More symbolism, all these different gods and all this kind of stuff. They have this symbolic representation of the unification of Egypt. Okay? So, red crown, there's our royal personage holding the sandals in this instance. Okay? The bull, trampling. Right? So, Lower Egypt right here. Upper Egypt right here. So we said this was symbolic of the unification of Egypt because previous to this, Egypt was in a lower and a upper part, and so now it's just unified as Egypt under the rule of the pharaoh. Okay. All right. So we're going to pretty much stop there. This is a little bit longer overview because I wanted to go over the study guys too. This is a vocab term for a mastaba, and that is just kind of like a precursor to a pyramid. Okay, so just so you guys know, we're going to get into some, these are just some examples of the early pyramids, which look a lot like ziggurats because they're stepped pyramids. So we'll get into this on Thursday. This is kind of where we'll start, and then we'll head into the pyramids of Giza. Okay? All right, see you later.